While struggling to make ends meet, a little girl shared her family's scarce food with an injured neighbor. When a mysterious man in a black suit discovered what she'd been doing, his hands trembled as he revealed the truth that would change her life. Sarah Jenkins walked down Cedar Street, her worn sneakers scuffing against the hot concrete. The afternoon sun beat down on her yellow dress as she made her usual rounds collecting mail for the neighbors. At 10 years old, she had her routine down to a science. Mrs. Peterson's house first, then the Wilsons, and finally Mr. Thompson's place at the end of the block. $2 from Mrs. Peterson, $3 from the Wilsons. She counted quietly, tucking the worn bills into her small pocket. The money wasn't much, but every little bit helped her mom with the bills. As she approached Mr. Thompson's house, something seemed off. His front porch, usually empty except for the old rocking chair, had pills scattered across the wooden planks. Sarah stopped at the bottom step, her heart racing when she spotted a figure slumped in the corner. "Mr. Thompson?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. A weak groan answered her. Mr. Thompson lay awkwardly against the porch railing, his arms scraped and bleeding. His white shirt had spots of red, and his medical alert bracelet caught the sunlight. Sarah's mom's words echoed in her head. Don't get involved in other people's business. Keep your distance, especially from strangers. But Mr. Thompson wasn't exactly a stranger. She'd been collecting his mail for months, though they'd never talked much beyond quick hellos. "Mr. Thompson, are you okay?" Sarah took one step up, then another. He lifted his head slowly, his face tight with pain. I fell. My pills." His voice trembled as he tried to reach for the scattered medication. Sarah looked up and down the street. No one was around. The neighbors who usually sat on their porches had retreated inside to escape the heat. Her hands shook as she made a decision. "I'll help you," she said, climbing the rest of the steps. She knelt down, carefully gathering the pills that had spilled from the orange containers. Her fingers worked quickly, separating them by color and size. "White ones here, blue ones there," she muttered, organizing them like she did when helping her mom with her medications during bad spells. "Thank you," Mr. Thompson whispered. "I got dizzy, shouldn't have tried to walk without my cane." Sarah noticed the cane lying just out of his reach. She picked it up and set it against the railing before turning her attention to his injured arm. "You're bleeding pretty bad," she said, eyeing the scrape that ran from his elbow to his wrist. "Do you have a first aid kit inside?" Mr. Thompson nodded weakly. In the kitchen, under the sink, Sarah bit her lip, looking at the front door. Going into a neighbor's house alone, her mom would definitely not approve. But leaving him bleeding on the porch didn't feel right either. "Can you stand if I help you?" she asked. It took several minutes of careful maneuvering, but they managed to get Mr. Thompson to his feet. He leaned heavily on both Sarah and his cane as they made their way inside. The house smelled musty, like old books and forgotten memories. Sarah helped Mr. Thompson to a kitchen chair before searching for the first aid kit. She found it exactly where he said, covered in a thin layer of dust. "My daughter-in-law bought that kit," Mr. Thompson said as Sarah cleaned his wound with antiseptic wipes. "Haven't seen her or my son in, well, it's been a while." Sarah worked in silence, the way she did when helping her mom. The scrape wasn't as bad as it had looked initially, but it still needed attention. She wrapped it carefully with gauze, making sure it wasn't too tight. "You've done this before," Mr. Thompson observed. "My mom gets sick sometimes," Sarah replied, packing up the first aid supplies. "I help her when she needs it." Mr. Thompson's eyes softened. "Your mother raised a kind girl." Sarah gathered the scattered pills from her pocket. "Which ones do you need to take now?" Mr. Thompson pointed to the white ones. "Just those? They're for my heart." Sarah counted out the correct dosage and filled a glass with water. As Mr. Thompson took his medication, she noticed more unopened pill bottles on the counter, their labels showing dates from last week. "Have you been taking your medicine regularly?" she asked, trying not to sound like she was prying. Mr. Thompson's silence answered her question. "I get confused sometimes," he admitted finally. "The doctors keep changing the prescriptions. It's hard to keep track." Sarah looked at the bottles, then at Mr. Thompson's tired face. She thought about her mom working double shifts, about the importance of looking out for each other. Against her better judgment, she made another decision. "I can help you organize them," she offered. "I do it for my mom all the time." We could put them in one of those daily pill containers. Mr. Thompson's eyes welled up. I couldn't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm offering. Sarah started gathering the bottles. Do you have a pill organizer? He shook his head. That's okay. I could bring one tomorrow. My mom has an extra one she doesn't use anymore. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows through the kitchen windows. Sarah knew she needed to get home soon. Will you be okay until tomorrow? She asked, helping Mr. Thompson to his living room recliner. I think so, he said, settling into the chair. But you don't have to come back. You've done more than enough already. Sarah picked up her small backpack from where she'd dropped it by the door. I'll come by after school. We'll get your pills sorted out. As she walked home in the fading light, Sarah wondered how she would explain this to her mom. She decided not to mention it unless asked directly. Sometimes helping others meant keeping small secrets. The next day's mail money would buy a new pill organizer instead of contributing to the electric bill. Sarah knew her mom would understand, even if she didn't approve. After all, she was the one who always said, we might not have much, but we've got enough to share. Sarah reached her front porch just as the streetlights came on. Through her window, she could see her mom moving around the kitchen, probably starting dinner. Before going inside, she glanced back toward Mr. Thompson's house. The porch light had come on, a warm glow in the gathering darkness. She touched the few remaining dollars in her pocket and smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, she was satisfied knowing she'd done the right thing. Sarah? Is that you? Her mom called from inside. Come on, Mom. Sarah took one last look at Mr. Thompson's house before heading inside, already planning tomorrow's visit in her mind. Sarah stared at her breakfast, pushing scrambled eggs around her plate. The morning sun filtered through their worn kitchen curtains, highlighting the empty chair where her mom usually sat. Another early shift meant another breakfast alone. A note on the fridge caught her eye. Leftovers in the blue container for dinner. Love you. Mom. Sarah opened the fridge and looked at the containers inside. 3 meals left for the week. Her stomach tightened as she thought about Mr. Thompson and his empty kitchen. Before she could change her mind, she grabbed the red container and put half of its contents into a clean plastic bowl. Mom always makes too much anyway, she said out loud, trying to convince herself. The walk to school felt longer than usual with the extra weight in her backpack. Sarah had wrapped the food container carefully in a paper bag, along with the spare pill organizer she'd found in their bathroom cabinet. Throughout her classes, Sarah's mind kept drifting to Mr. Thompson. Had he taken his morning medications? Was his arm hurting? MS. Parker, her math teacher, had to call her name twice during division problems. Sarah? The answer to problem 6? I'm 42. Try again. Please pay attention. When the final bell rang, Sarah rushed out of school. Instead of taking her usual route home, she headed straight for Mr. Thompson's house. The black numbers on his mailbox needed repainting, she noticed. Another thing to add to her mental list. She knocked on his door, shifting from foot to foot. No answer. She knocked again, louder this time. Mr. Thompson? It's Sarah from yesterday. Shuffling sounds came from inside, followed by the click of a lock. The door opened slowly. Sarah? Mr. Thompson squinted in the afternoon light. He wore the same clothes as yesterday, his injured arm held stiffly at his side. I brought some things to help, she said, already stepping inside. The house smelled stale, like unopened windows and forgotten meals. You didn't have to dash. Have you eaten lunch? Sarah interrupted, setting her backpack on the kitchen table. Mr. Thompson's silence answered her question. She pulled out the container of food. My mom's chicken and rice. It's really good. I couldn't take your food, it's already here, Sarah said firmly, the way her mom talked when decisions weren't up for debate. She found a clean plate in the dish rack and transferred the food. Do you have a microwave? The meal heated. Sarah turned her attention to the pill bottles scattered across the counter. She lined them up, reading each label carefully. This one's for morning, this one's for night, she muttered, pulling out the pill organizer. Which doctor changed your prescriptions? Dr. Benson, Mr. Thompson said between bites of food. But I haven't seen him in a while. Transportation's difficult, Sarah nodded, focusing on sorting the pills into daily compartments. These little white ones are for your heart, right? Yes. 2 in the morning, 1 at night. And the blue ones? Blood pressure. I think. Sarah frowned. You need to be sure. Do you have Dr. Benson's number? Mr. Thompson pointed to a paper stuck to his fridge with a magnet. Sarah copied the number into her school notebook. She'd call later, pretending to be his daughter-in-law if she had to. The food's good, Mr. Thompson said softly. Thank you. Sarah looked up from the pill organizer. Color had returned to his face, and he sat straighter in his chair. How's your arm? Sore but better. He rolled up his sleeve to show her the bandage. You did a good job. It needs changing, Sarah said, eyeing the spots of dried blood. Where's the first aid kit? As she cleaned and re-bandaged his arm, Sarah noticed other things around the kitchen. Unopened mail piled on a side table. Unwashed dishes in the sink. A calendar on the wall still showing last month. When's the last time someone visited you? She asked, securing the fresh bandage. Mr. Thompson stared at his hands. My son used to come by. Before the argument started. Now it's just the occasional phone call. What did you argue about? Life. Choices. The usual things fathers and sons fight over. He smiled sadly. Stupid things looking back. Sarah gathered the used bandages, throwing them in the trash. She'd need to bring more supplies tomorrow. And food. And maybe some cleaning supplies. I should head home, she said, checking the time. Mom will be back for dinner soon. Does she know you're here? Sarah busied herself packing her backpack. She knows I help the neighbors. But not about this? Not exactly. Sarah zipped her bag closed. Take 2 of the white pills before bed. I wrote everything down on this paper. Which pills to take when. I'll check tomorrow to make sure you're doing it right. Mr. Thompson held the paper like it was something precious. You're a good kid, Sarah Jenkins. Just don't forget the pills, she said, heading for the door. And eat the rest of that food. Outside, Sarah noticed a black car driving slowly past the house. The windows were tinted dark, making it impossible to see the driver. Something about it made her uneasy. Back home, Sarah started her homework at the kitchen table. The math problem still didn't make sense, but she couldn't focus anyway. Her mind kept going back to Mr. Thompson's empty kitchen, his lonely house. The front door opened, and her mom walked in, still in her waitress uniform. Sarah, have you seen the red container? I could have sworn I left more chicken and rice. Sarah bent lower over her math book. Maybe we ate it already? Her mom sighed, opening the fridge. I need to be more careful with our food budget. I can skip lunch at school, Sarah offered. Save some money. Absolutely not. Her mom closed the fridge firmly. We're not that tight yet, but we need to be careful. Okay. Sarah nodded, guilt gnawing at her stomach. Mom, do we have any extra bandages? For, art class. Her mom gave her a strange look, but didn't push. Check the bathroom cabinet. That night, Sarah lay in bed, making lists in her head. Bandages. Food. Cleaning supplies. Dr. Benson's number to call. The black car to watch out for. Everything okay with you? Her mom asked from the doorway. You've been quiet tonight. Just tired, Sarah said. School stuff. Her mom came over and kissed her forehead. You're growing up so fast. Sometimes I forget you're still my little girl. After her mom left, Sarah reached under her bed and pulled out her piggy bank. The coins inside rattled as she counted them. $3.42. Not much, but maybe enough for some bandages. Tomorrow she'd skip buying lunch at school. Mr. Thompson needed the help more than she needed a sandwich. Besides, she wasn't that hungry anyway. In the distance, a car engine rumbled. Sarah went to her window just in time to see the black car glide past their house again, its tinted windows reflecting the streetlights. She pulled her curtains closed and went back to bed, but sleep was a long time coming. A week passed, and Sarah's routine shifted. School, Mr. Thompson's house, home before Mom. Each day followed the same pattern. Her backpack grew heavier with supplies. Bandages stolen one at a time from their bathroom. Food sneaked from their kitchen, and the notebook where she tracked Mr. Thompson's medications. Today, she balanced a loaf of bread and some cheese in her arms as she pushed open Mr. Thompson's front door with her hip. She didn't knock anymore. Mr. Thompson, she called out. I brought lunch. In here, his voice came from the living room. She found him in his usual chair, but today he held something in his hands, an old flip phone. Darn thing won't work, he muttered, pressing buttons randomly. Used to be simpler, just picking up the receiver and dialing. Sarah set the food down on the coffee table. Let me see. The phone was ancient, with scratched plastic and faded numbers. Dead from the looks of it. When's the last time you charged it? Mr. Thompson blinked. Charged it? Sarah spotted the charger cord buried under newspapers. 10 minutes later, the phone's screen flickered to life. See? It just needed power. She sat on the arm of his chair, showing him the buttons. This one for calls, this one for that little phone book thing. Could you? He hesitated. Could you put your number in it? In case I fall again. Sarah added her number, listing herself as Sarah. Helper. As she typed, she noticed only 2 other numbers saved, Son and Dr. Benson. A car sound outside made her look up. The black car crawled past the house again, slower than usual. Sarah had seen it every day this week. Mr. Thompson? Does anyone you know drive a black car? He shook his head. Don't know many people these days. Except you? Sarah pulled the curtains closed. Let's have lunch. While Mr. Thompson ate, Sarah cleaned. She developed a system. Dishes first, then counters, then floors. Today she found more unopened bills hidden under a stack of magazines. These are important, she said, holding up the envelopes. They're from the electric company. Just put them with the others. But a horn honked outside. Sarah peeked through the curtains. The black car had parked across the street. I need to check something, she said, hurrying to the front window. A man in a dark suit sat in the driver's seat, writing in a notebook. As if sensing her watching, he looked up. Sarah ducked behind the curtain, heart pounding. When she looked again, the car was pulling away. Everything okay? Mr. Thompson called from the kitchen. Fine. She went back to the bills, trying to keep her hands from shaking. You need to open these? Mr. Thompson sighed. My son used to handle all that. Before. Before what? He picked up a framed photo from the side table, wiping dust from the glass. Before I told him I didn't need his help, that I could manage on my own. He laughed bitterly. Guess I proved myself wrong. Sarah studied the photo. A younger Mr. Thompson stood next to a tall man in a suit, both smiling stiffly at the camera. Is that your son? Robert. 5 years ago, at his firm's Christmas party. Last time I saw him, he looks like you, acts like me too. Stubborn, quick to anger, slow to forgive. Mr. Thompson set the photo down. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, they say. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from her mom. Where are you? Her stomach dropped. She'd lost track of time. I have to go, she said, grabbing her backpack. Remember, white pills at 6, blue ones at 8. I'll check tomorrow. She ran all the way home, but her mom's car already sat in the driveway. Sarah slowed, trying to catch her breath. Through the kitchen window, she saw her mom standing at the open fridge, counting containers. The front door creaked as Sarah opened it. Sarah Jenkins. Her mom's voice carried from the kitchen. Come here. Sarah dropped her backpack by the door. Her mom stood with the fridge open, hands on her hips. Want to explain why our food keeps disappearing? Or why the first aid supplies are almost gone? Or maybe where you've been spending your afternoons? Sarah started, but her mom cut her off. Mrs. Wilson saw you going into Mr. Thompson's house. Every day this week, after I specifically told you not to get involved with strangers. He's not a stranger, Sarah protested. He's our neighbor, and he needed help. That's not your responsibility. You're 10 years old. He fell. He was hurt. Nobody was helping him. Her mom closed the fridge. That's what social services is for. Adult help. Professional help. He just needed someone to sort his pills and make sure he eats. Like I do for you when you're sick. Her mom's face softened slightly. That's different. Why? Because we're family? He doesn't have family here. His son never visits. He was all alone. Sarah, her mom sat heavily at the kitchen table. We barely have enough for ourselves. We can't take care of everyone. You always say we have enough to share. Food and bandages, maybe. But your time? Your safety? That's too much to risk. Her mom rubbed her temples. I want you to stop going over there. But no buts. I'm your mother, and I'm telling you to stop. She stood up. Now go to your homework. Sarah trudged to her room, closing the door harder than necessary. She pulled out her phone to check Mr. Thompson's evening medication reminder. The screen showed a missed call from an unknown number. Outside her window, the black car glided past their house again. This time, it stopped at the corner. The man in the suit got out, straightened his tie, and started walking toward their house. Sarah's heart jumped into her throat. She ran to her mom. "Mom, someone's coming." "What?" The doorbell rang. Through the front window, Sarah saw the man from the black car, standing on their porch, his notebook in hand. He looked exactly like the man in Mr. Thompson's old photo, just older. Grayer. Her mom opened the door. "Mrs. Jenkins?" The man's voice was deep, official sounding. "I'm Robert Thompson. We need to talk about my father." Sarah's mom glanced back at her, eyes wide. Sarah gripped the back of a chair, her knuckles white. The truth was about to come out, one way or another. Sarah's mom stood frozen in the doorway, one hand still on the door handle. "Robert Thompson? May I come in?" He adjusted his tie again, a nervous gesture that reminded Sarah of his father. Her mom stepped aside, shooting Sarah a look that clearly meant stay quiet. Mr. Thompson's son entered their living room, his expensive suit out of place among their worn furniture. "I've been watching my father's house," he said, opening his notebook. "And I've noticed your daughter making regular visits." "Mr. Thompson, I can explain, Sarah started, but her mom cut her off. "Sarah, go to your room." "No," Robert said quickly. "Please let her stay. I need to understand what's been happening." Sarah sank into the corner of their couch, making herself as small as possible. Her mom remained standing, arms crossed. First, her mom said, "Why were you watching your father's house instead of visiting him?" Robert's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "It's complicated." "Doesn't seem complicated to me," Sarah muttered. "Sarah," her mom warned. "No, she's right." Robert sat heavily in their armchair. "It's not complicated. I'm a coward who couldn't face his own father. So I hired private investigators to check on him instead." "The black car," Sarah said. "That was you?" He nodded. "Different investigators, but yes. They reported that he wasn't taking care of himself. Bills unpaid, medications neglected. Then suddenly things started improving. They saw a young girl visiting daily." "You?" Sarah met his gaze. "He needed help?" "I know." Robert's voice cracked. "That should have been me helping him, not a 10-year-old girl." Sarah's mom sat on the couch next to her. "Why didn't you come sooner?" "Pride, anger, fear." He laughed humorlessly. "Take your pick. We had a falling out 5 years ago. He said he didn't need my help, that I was treating him like a child. I said, fine, handle everything yourself." We both dug in our heels. "He has a picture of you," Sarah said, "from a Christmas party. He looks at it a lot." Robert pulled out his phone, swiping through photos. He turned it to show them a picture of Mr. Thompson holding a baby. "My daughter, his granddaughter. He's never met her." Sarah's mom softened slightly. "It's not too late, you know. That's why I'm here." He turned to Sarah. "The investigators said you've been organizing his medications?" Sarah nodded, then ran to get her notebook. "I write everything down. White pills in the morning, blue ones at night. And I make sure he eats lunch." Robert flipped through the notebook, his hands trembling slightly. "You've been doing my job. Better than I would have." "He misses you," Sarah said simply. "He just doesn't know how to say it." A knock at the door made them all jump. Sarah's mom opened it to find Mr. Thompson himself, leaning heavily on his cane. Sarah didn't come for the evening medication check, he said, then stopped short at the sight of his son. "Robert?" The room went silent. Father and son stared at each other, 5 years of hurt and pride and stubbornness hanging between them. "Dad," Robert finally managed. "You look old." Mr. Thompson's voice was sharp. "Weak? Is that why you've been having people spy on me?" "I was worried enough to watch from a distance, but not enough to visit. I'm here now. Because of her." Mr. Thompson nodded toward Sarah. "It took a child to show you what family means." Robert stood. "Dad, save it." Mr. Thompson turned to leave, stumbling slightly. Both Robert and Sarah moved to help him, but he waved them off. "I don't need anyone's help." "Yes, you do," Sarah said firmly. Everyone turned to look at her. "You both do." She went to her backpack and pulled out the pill organizer. "Mr. Thompson, you need help with your medications. That's not weakness, that's just true. And you," she turned to Robert, You need help fixing things with your dad. That's not weakness either. Sarah, her mom said softly, but she wasn't done. You're both too proud to say you're sorry first. So I'm telling you both, say it. Now, before you waste more time being stubborn. The two men stared at her, then at each other. Finally, Robert spoke. I'm sorry, Dad. I should have been here. Mr. Thompson's stern expression cracked. I'm sorry too, son. I should have let you help. Sarah picked up her backpack. Good. Now Mr. Thompson needs his evening pills, and you two need to talk. I'll show you how to organize the medications, Robert. Her mom caught her arm. Sarah, remember what we discussed about stopping these visits? Mom, please. Sarah looked between father and son. They need help learning how to be family again. Just for a little while. Her mom studied the two men. One proud but frail, the other successful but lost, and sighed. 1 month. You can help for 1 month, but only if I'm with you. And she turned to Robert. Only if you start taking responsibility for your father's care. Of course, Robert said quickly. I'll hire proper medical help, get his bills sorted out. No. Mr. Thompson's voice was firm. No hired help. Just family. Including, he smiled at Sarah, my honorary granddaughter here. They walked to Mr. Thompson's house together, father, son, and the little girl who had bridged their divide. Sarah showed Robert how to organize the pills, which foods his father preferred, how to change the bandages on his arm. As she worked, she heard snippets of conversation from the living room. Apologies. Explanations. The sound of old wounds beginning to heal. Her mom appeared in the doorway. Time to go home, Sarah. You have homework. Just one more thing. She went to the living room and handed Robert her notebook. Everything's in here. His medications, his schedule, Dr. Benson's number. Don't mess it up. Robert knelt to her level. Thank you, Sarah, for taking care of him when I couldn't. For showing me what I almost lost. Just visit more, she said. And bring your daughter. He really wants to meet her. That night, as Sarah got ready for bed, she saw the black car parked in Mr. Thompson's driveway. But this time, instead of watching from a distance, Robert was inside with his father, their shadows moving behind the curtains as they talked. Her mom came to tuck her in. You did a good thing, Sarah. But next time you want to help someone, tell you first. Tell me first. She kissed Sarah's forehead. Your heart's bigger than your judgment sometimes. Sarah smiled, thinking of the father and son finally talking after 5 years of silence. Sometimes that's not a bad thing. Through her window, she could still see the lights on at Mr. Thompson's house. No more secrets, no more black cars watching from a distance. Just family finding their way back to each other, one small step at a time. The next morning, Sarah stared at the big red D on her math test. MS. Parker's neat handwriting below read, "See me after class." Her stomach churned. She'd been so busy with Mr. Thompson and all the excitement with Robert that she'd forgotten to study. The numbers blurred on the page as tears threatened to fall. Sarah, MS. Parker called as the other kids filed out for lunch. Can we talk? Sarah approached the desk, clutching her failed test. This isn't like you, MS. Parker said, tapping the paper. You've always been a B student in math. What's changed? I've been busy, Sarah mumbled. Too busy to study? MS. Parker leaned forward. Your last 3 homework assignments were incomplete, and now this test. I'm concerned. Sarah shifted her weight from foot to foot. I'll do better next time. I've already called your mother for a conference after school today. Sarah's head snapped up. But no buts. This isn't just about one bad test, Sarah. Your grades are slipping in other subjects too. We need to figure out what's going on. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Sarah barely touched her lunch, saving half her sandwich for Mr. Thompson out of habit. When the final bell rang, her feet felt like lead as she walked to MS. Parker's classroom. Her mom was already there, still in her waitress uniform. She must have come straight from her shift. Sarah, her mom patted the chair next to her. MS. Parker's been telling me about your grades. MS. Parker spread out several papers on her desk. As you can see, there's been a significant decline over the past few weeks. Sarah seems distracted in class, and her homework is often incomplete. Is this true? Her mom asked. Sarah stared at her shoes. Maybe. It's not just math, MS. Parker continued. Her English teacher reported similar concerns. Sarah's usually very engaged in class discussions, but lately, I've had a lot on my mind, Sarah protested. Her mom's face softened. Is this about Mr. Thompson? MS. Parker looked confused. Who? Our elderly neighbor. Sarah's been helping him through some family issues. Mom, you make it sound wrong. He needed help, and now you need help, her mom said firmly. With your schoolwork? MS. Parker cleared her throat. I can arrange for after-school tutoring. No. Sarah stood up. I have to help Mr. Thompson with his evening medications. Robert's still learning the schedule. And Sarah, her mom interrupted. Sit down. Sarah sat, tears finally spilling over. This is exactly what I was worried about, her mom said. You're taking on too much. You're 10 years old. School needs to come first. But no buts. MS. Parker, we'll take that tutoring. The walk home was silent. Sarah dragged her feet, mind racing with all the things she needed to do. Check Mr. Thompson's medications. Make sure Robert remembered the right dosages. Organize the new pills Dr. Benson had prescribed. I'm taking an extra shift tonight, her mom said suddenly. What? Why? Bills don't pay themselves. And now, with tutoring costs, guilt hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. I'm sorry, Mom. I know you are, baby. Her mom stopped walking and knelt down to Sarah's level. You have such a big heart. But sometimes helping others means making sure you're taken care of first. At Mr. Thompson's house, they found Robert trying to sort medications. Blue ones in the morning? He asked when they walked in. No. Sarah rushed to the kitchen. Blue ones at night. White ones in the morning. Didn't you read my notebook? I tried, but your handwriting. Sarah sighed and began reorganizing the pill container. Her mom watched from the doorway. Where's Mr. Thompson? She asked. Napping, Robert said. The new medications make him drowsy. Sarah froze. New medications? What new medications? Robert held up an orange bottle. Dr. Benson prescribed them yesterday. For his blood pressure. But that'll change the whole schedule. Sarah grabbed her notebook, flipping through pages frantically. We need to reorganize everything. The white pills can't mix with these, and the timing has to be just right, and Sarah. Her mom's voice was gentle but firm. Let Robert handle it. But he doesn't know how. Then teach him. Once. Tonight. But after this, you need to focus on school. Robert looked between them, understanding dawning on his face. Sarah, are your grades suffering because of all this? Sarah's silence answered for her. Robert ran a hand through his hair. I should have realized. I'm so sorry. This should never have been your responsibility. But I want to help. And you have, came Mr. Thompson's voice from the doorway. He stood in his robe, looking more alert than usual. You've helped more than you know. But your mother's right. School comes first. Sarah looked at her notebook, then at the pills, then at Mr. Thompson. But who'll make sure everything's done right? I will, Robert said. It's my job. It always was. Mr. Thompson nodded. My son may be a bit slow to learn, but he'll get there. Hey, Robert protested, but he was smiling. Sarah's mom put a hand on her shoulder. Come on. You have makeup work to do for MS. Parker. Reluctantly, Sarah handed her notebook to Robert. Everything's in here. Don't lose it. I won't. He knelt down like he had the night before. Thank you, Sarah, for everything. But now it's time to be a kid again. Later that night, Sarah sat at her desk, struggling through math problems. Through her window, she could see Robert's car still parked at his father's house. The lights were on, and occasionally she caught glimpses of father and son moving around the kitchen. Her mom knocked on her door. How's the homework going? Hard, Sarah admitted. I'm really behind. You'll catch up. Her mom sat on the bed. I'm proud of you, you know, for failing math, for caring so much, for seeing someone who needed help and not looking away. She smiled. But I'll be even prouder when you bring those grades back up. Sarah looked back at her math book. Mom, do you think they'll be okay? Mr. Thompson and Robert? I think. Her mom paused, following Sarah's gaze to the lit windows next door. I think they've finally figured out what you knew all along. That family takes care of family no matter what. Sarah turned back to her homework, but not before seeing Robert help his father to the porch rocker. The same rocker where she'd found him that first day, hurt and alone. He wasn't alone anymore. And somehow, that made all the missed homework and failed tests a little easier to bear. Sarah sat in MS Parker's classroom during lunch, working through math problems. 2 weeks of tutoring had helped, but she still felt behind. A half-eaten sandwich sat forgotten on the corner of her desk. "Better, MS," Parker said, checking her latest work. "You're getting there, Sarah." Through the classroom window, she could see Mr. Thompson's house. Robert's black car wasn't in the driveway today. He'd promised to visit every day, but lately his visits had become less frequent. "Can I go now?" Sarah asked. "I need to check Dash." She stopped herself. "MS." Parker sighed. "Check on Mr. Thompson? I just want to make sure he's okay." "Sarah, we talked about this. Your mother was very clear about focusing on school." A movement caught Sarah's eye. A different black car, one she didn't recognize, pulled up in front of Mr. Thompson's house. A woman in a business suit got out, carrying a briefcase. Sarah stood up so quickly her chair fell over. "I have to go." "Sarah, we're not finished." Dash, but Sarah was already running, her half-finished math sheets forgotten on the desk. She burst out of the school building, ignoring the calls of teachers behind her. The woman was halfway up Mr. Thompson's walkway when Sarah reached the fence. "Stop," Sarah called out. "Who are you?" The woman turned, surprised. "I'm from Adult Protective Services. We received a report about an elderly man possibly being neglected." Sarah's heart pounded. "He's not neglected. His son takes care of him. And you are?" "I'm Sarah. I help sometimes. Mr. Thompson's fine. Robert visits him." The woman checked her notes. "According to our report, Robert Thompson hasn't been here in 5 days." Sarah's protest died in her throat. Had it really been that long? The front door opened, and Mr. Thompson appeared. He looked tired, unshaven. Nothing like the improving man Sarah had seen 2 weeks ago. "Can I help you?" he asked the woman. "Mr. Thompson? I'm Mrs. Reeves from APS. May I come in?" Sarah slipped past them both, running straight to the kitchen. Pills lay scattered on the counter, the organizer she'd given Robert lying empty nearby. Unwashed dishes filled the sink. Old food sat out on plates. No, no, no," she muttered, quickly gathering pills. "Robert promised. He promised." In the living room, she heard Mrs. Reeves asking questions. About meals, medications, daily care. Mr. Thompson's answers were vague, confused. "And who helps you with your medications?" Mrs. Reeves asked. "My son, he was supposed to." "When did you last take your heart medication?" Mr. Thompson looked at the kitchen, meeting Sarah's eyes. "I'm not sure." Sarah's hands shook as she tried to sort the pills. White ones morning, blue ones night. Or was it the other way around now? The new prescription had changed everything. "Sarah?" Her mom's voice made her jump. She stood in the kitchen doorway, still in her waitress uniform. "The school called me." Before Sarah could explain, Mrs. Reeves appeared behind her mom. "Mrs. Jenkins? I understand your daughter has been involved in Mr. Thompson's care." "She was. She's not anymore. She needs to focus on school." "Mom," Sarah protested. "Look at this place. Look at him." Robert stopped coming. Her mom took in the messy kitchen, the scattered pills, Mr. Thompson's unkempt appearance. "What happened to the schedule?" "The notebook?" "I don't know," Mr. Thompson said quietly. "Robert said he'd handle everything, but his work got busy and you're back where you started," Sarah finished. "Alone." Mrs. Reeves made notes on her tablet. "Given the situation, we'll need to discuss alternative care arrangements. Perhaps an assisted living facility. No," Sarah and Mr. Thompson said together. "He just needs help," Sarah insisted. "Real help, not people who promise and then forget." A car engine rumbled outside. Robert's black car pulled into the driveway. "Finally," Sarah muttered. Robert burst through the door, taking in the crowd in his father's house. "What's going on?" "The school called," said Sarah Dash. "Where have you been?" Sarah demanded. "You promised to visit every day." "I had meetings. Work got busy." "Stop." Sarah's voice cracked. "Just stop making excuses. He needed you. You promised to learn the medications, to keep track of everything. You promised." Robert stepped back, face pale. "I tried, but it was complicated. The new prescriptions, the schedules. It's not complicated. It's your dad. He needs help, and you're his son, and you just gave up. Again." The room fell silent. Mrs. Reeves cleared her throat. Mr. Thompson, given the circumstances no, Robert interrupted. Wait, Sarah's right. He turned to his father. I messed up. Again. I got overwhelmed, and instead of asking for help, I just stopped coming. Like last time, Mr. Thompson said softly. Like last time? Robert's shoulders slumped. I'm sorry, Dad. I thought I could handle everything myself, prove I could do it. But I can't. Not alone. Sarah picked up her old notebook from where it lay buried under mail. Then don't do it alone. Ask for help. From who? You. You're 10. You need to be in school, not taking care of my father. Not from me. Sarah looked at Mrs. Reeves. From professionals. People who know what they're doing. But that doesn't mean you stop visiting. It doesn't mean you give up. Mrs. Reeves nodded slowly. We can arrange for home health care. Daily visits from a nurse. But, she looked at Robert sternly. Family involvement is crucial. I'll do better, Robert said. I'll make a real schedule this time. Work around his needs, not mine. We've heard that before, Sarah's mom said. I know. But this time, he pulled out his phone, showing them his calendar. I'm blocking out time. Every day. Non-negotiable. And I'm hiring help. But I'll be here too. I promise. More promises, Sarah muttered. Sarah, her mom warned. No, she's right. Robert knelt down to Sarah's level. I made a lot of promises. And broken them. But this time, I'm not promising to do everything perfectly. I'm promising to try. To ask for help when I need it. To be here, even when it's hard. Mr. Thompson stepped forward, putting a hand on his son's shoulder. That's all I ever wanted. Just be here. Mrs. Reeves made more notes. I'll need to make follow-up visits. Check on the new arrangements. Good, Sarah said. Someone should. Her mom squeezed her shoulder. Come on. We need to get you back to school. Sarah looked at the scattered pills, the messy kitchen. But no buts. Her mom turned to Robert. Fix this. Today. Now. Robert nodded. I will. Sarah. He held out his hand for the notebook. One last time. Show me how. Sarah looked at her mom, who nodded slightly. Okay. She opened the notebook. One last time. Pay attention. As she showed Robert the medication schedule again, Mrs. Reeves arranged for home health care, and Mr. Thompson watched them all with tired but hopeful eyes. Sarah felt something shift. This wasn't an ending. It wasn't even really a beginning. It was just family learning how to be family again. One day at a time, one promise at a time, and this time, with more than just a little girl's determination holding them together. 1 month later, Sarah walked home from school, clutching a math test with a big B+ written in red at the top. Her steps were light, no longer weighed down by the responsibility of Mr. Thompson's care. Still, she glanced at his house as she passed, checking for Robert's car. It was there, as it had been every afternoon this week. Voices drifted from the open windows. Robert's deep tone, Mr. Thompson's slower speech, and a woman's professional instructions. The new nurse, Sarah guessed. She'd seen her coming and going, clipboard in hand, always at the same times each day. Sarah, Robert called from the porch. Come see this. She hesitated at the gate. Her mom's rules about focusing on school still stood, but this was just a quick visit, right? Come on. Robert waved her over. Dad's got something to show you. Sarah found Mr. Thompson sitting in his usual rocker, but something was different. His clothes were pressed, his face cleanly shaved. A tablet computer sat in his lap. Look who I'm talking to, he said proudly, turning the screen. A woman's face smiled from the tablet. Next to her, a little girl with Mr. Thompson's eyes waved excitedly. Sarah, meet my wife Lisa and our daughter Emma, Robert said. They're coming to visit this weekend. Hi, Sarah. The little girl bounced closer to the camera. Grandpa's been telling me about you. Sarah waved shyly. Hi, Emma. Show her your room, Dad, Robert prompted. Mr. Thompson stood steadier now, Sarah noticed, and carried the tablet inside. The house smelled different. Clean. Fresh paint covered the walls, and new curtains hung in the windows. Robert hired people to fix everything, Mr. Thompson explained as they walked. Said if I'm meeting my granddaughter, the place needed to look nice. Sarah followed them to the spare room. Gone were the dusty boxes and old furniture. Instead, bright yellow walls held princess decals. A small bed with a rainbow quilt sat in the corner. Emma's room, Robert said softly, for when she visits, which will be often. The nurse, Sarah had learned her name, was Ms. Johnson, appeared in the doorway. Time for afternoon medications, Mr. Thompson. Already sorted, he said proudly, pointing to the pill organizer on his nightstand. The same one Sarah had given him, now neatly labeled with typed instructions. Ms. Johnson checked them anyway, marking something on her clipboard. Perfect. And your blood pressure this morning was much better. Because I'm following doctor's orders, Mr. Thompson said, winking at Sarah. Learned that from a very smart young lady. Speaking of smart, Robert noticed the paper in Sarah's hand. Is that a test? Sarah held up her B+. Math. MS. Parker says if I keep this up, I might make the honor roll. That's wonderful. Mr. Thompson beamed. We should celebrate. Robert. Why don't you dash? Already planned, Robert interrupted. Sarah, would you and your mom like to join us for dinner tonight? Lisa and Emma's flight gets in at 6. Sarah's eyes widened. Really? But I have to ask my mom. Already did, came her mom's voice. She stood in the hallway, still in her work uniform, but smiling. Mr. Thompson invited us this morning. You knew? Sarah asked. Some secrets are good secrets, her mom said, especially when they involve family dinners. Family. Sarah looked around at the transformed house, at Mr. Thompson taking his medications without prompting, at Robert beaming with pride, at Emma's excited face on the tablet screen. This was what she'd wanted all along. Not just to help, but to see them become a family again. Can I help set the table? She asked. Robert laughed. Some things never change. Always helping. Speaking of help, Ms. Johnson checked her watch. It's time for your physical therapy exercises, Mr. Thompson. Already, he groaned good-naturedly. These nurses are slave drivers, Sarah. Much stricter than you were. That's why they're professionals, Sarah said seriously, then grinned. And why you're getting better. As Mr. Thompson did his exercises, Sarah helped Robert in the kitchen. He'd learned to cook simple meals, nothing fancy, but better than the takeout container she used to find in the trash. Emma's so excited to meet her grandpa, Robert said as he chopped vegetables. I've been telling her stories. About him, about you, me. The little girl who taught a stubborn father and son how to be family again. He paused his chopping. We owe you so much, Sarah. You don't owe me anything. Just... She thought about those first days, the scattered pills, the lonely house. Just don't stop trying. Even when it's hard. I won't. Promise. He smiled. And this time, I'm keeping it. The afternoon passed quickly. Sarah's mom went home to change clothes while Sarah helped Emma pick out her bed sheets via tablet. Mr. Thompson told stories about Robert as a boy, making his son blush and Emma giggle. At 6, Robert left to pick up his wife and daughter from the airport. Sarah sat with Mr. Thompson on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky orange. Nervous? She asked. Terrified? He admitted. What if she doesn't like me? She already loves you, Sarah said. And you know what to do now. Take your medicine. Do your exercises. Let people help. When did you get so wise? Around the same time you got so stubborn, she teased. They heard a car approaching. Robert's black car turned into the driveway. But this time, instead of one suit-clad man emerging alone, the back doors opened and a small figure burst out. Grandpa! Emma ran up the walkway, her mother following more slowly. Mr. Thompson stood, arms open. Emma crashed into him with the unrestrained joy of a child meeting family for the first time. You're just like your pictures, she exclaimed. But better. Lisa approached more carefully, but her smile was genuine. Dad, she said softly, hugging Mr. Thompson. It's so good to finally meet you. Sarah started to slip away, feeling like an intruder on this family moment. But Emma grabbed her hand. Wait, Grandpa says you're the one who fixed everything. That makes you family too. Sarah looked at her mom, who had returned wearing her good dress. She nodded. Okay, Sarah said. Family. They crowded into the kitchen, now filled with the smell of Robert's cooking. Emma chattered about school, Lisa asked about Mr. Thompson's health, and Sarah's mom shared stories about the neighborhood. As they ate, Sarah watched Mr. Thompson. His hands were steady as he cut his food. He remembered to take his evening pills without prompting. He laughed at Emma's jokes and answered Lisa's questions thoughtfully. This was what healing looked like, she realized. Not just bandages and pill organizers, but love and time and effort. Family taking care of family, the way it should be. Later, as they said goodbye for the night, Emma hugged Sarah fiercely. "Will you come play with me tomorrow? After school?" Sarah looked at her mom, who smiled. "Homework first, then you can visit." "Deal." "Deal," both girls said together. On their own porch, Sarah and her mom watched the lights in Mr. Thompson's house. Through the windows, they could see the family settling in. Emma exploring her new room, Lisa arranging photos on the mantel, Robert helping his father with his evening routine. "You did good, baby," her mom said softly. "You built a bridge when they couldn't see how to reach each other." Sarah leaned against her mom, tired but happy. Sometimes people just need help seeing what's right in front of them. And sometimes, her mom kissed her head, they need a stubborn little girl to show them the way. In Mr. Thompson's house, Emma's laughter rang out, followed by the deeper chuckles of her father and grandfather. The sound floated across the evening air like a promise kept, like a family healing, like a bridge finally, firmly built. The summer sun beat down on Cedar Street as Sarah sat on her front steps, watching Emma chase bubbles across Mr. Thompson's lawn. 2 months had passed since that first family dinner, and the changes were impossible to miss. "Higher, Sarah," Emma called, jumping for another bubble. "Make them go higher." Sarah obliged, lifting the bubble wand toward the cloudless sky. From his porch rocker, Mr. Thompson watched them, his daily pill organizer and a glass of water on the table beside him. "My turn with the wand," he called out, setting aside his newspaper. Emma ran to help her grandfather stand. His movements were smoother now, more confident. The physical therapy had worked wonders, though he still kept his cane nearby. "Careful," Sarah warned as he took the bubble solution. "Don't spill it like last time." "That was one time," he protested, but his eyes twinkled. "And as I recall, you two enjoyed the impromptu slip-and-slide it created." Sarah grinned, remembering Emma's delighted squeals as they'd slid through the soapy grass. Her mom hadn't been thrilled about the grass stains, but even she had laughed at their bubble-covered antics. Robert's black car pulled into the driveway, right on schedule for his daily lunch visit. He wasn't alone today. Lisa sat in the passenger seat, carrying a large picnic basket. "Mommy!" Emma abandoned the bubbles to rush to her mother. "Did you bring the special sandwiches?" "Of course," Lisa smiled, setting down the basket. "Peanut butter and banana, just how Grandpa likes them." Mr. Thompson's face lit up. "Just like my mother used to make." They spread a blanket on the lawn, the kind of casual family picnic that would have been impossible months ago. Sarah watched Robert help his father sit comfortably on the blanket, their movements natural and easy now, no trace of their former awkwardness. "Sarah," her mom called from their porch. "Did you finish your summer reading?" "Almost." Sarah held up her book. "2 more chapters. Read them now, then you can have lunch with everyone." Emma pouted. "But Mrs. Jenkins, it's summer." Sarah shouldn't have to read during summer. "Education doesn't take vacations, young lady," Mr. Thompson said firmly. "Besides, Sarah's going to be in the advanced class this year. She needs to be prepared." Pride swelled in Sarah's chest. After her grades improved, Parker had recommended her for the advanced program. The summer reading list was challenging, but Sarah didn't mind. She had plenty of time to read now that she wasn't managing Mr. Thompson's care. "I'll read fast," she promised Emma, settling back on her steps with the book. As she read, the sounds of family life drifted around her. Emma's giggles as Robert tried to make a sandwich one-handed. Lisa discussing flower arrangements with Sarah's mom, who had joined them during her lunch break. Mr. Thompson telling stories about Robert's childhood, embarrassing his son and delighting his granddaughter. A car door slammed, making everyone look up. Ms. Johnson, the nurse, walked up the path carrying her usual clipboard. "Don't let me interrupt," she said, checking Mr. Thompson's vital signs with practiced efficiency. "Blood pressure's good today. Better than last week." "It's the sandwiches," Mr. Thompson declared. "Medicine for the soul." "It's the regular checkups and medication compliance." Ms. Johnson corrected, but she was smiling. "And maybe a little bit the sandwiches." Sarah watched the nurse work, remembering how she used to be the one checking medications and bandages. "Ms. Johnson was so much better at it, professional, thorough, always knowing exactly what to do. All set, MS. Johnson announced. I'll be back this evening for the final check. Remember, no skipping the evening exercises just because Emma's here. I help with exercises, Emma said proudly. I count for Grandpa. And you're very good at it, MS. Johnson agreed. She turned to Robert. The home health aide will be here at 3 for the housekeeping check. Robert nodded, marking it in his phone calendar. He kept track of everything now, medications, appointments, visits. No more scattered pills or missed checkups. Sarah finished her chapters and joined them on the blanket. Lisa handed her a sandwich, cut diagonally just how she liked it. Thank you, Sarah said automatically. No, thank you, Lisa replied softly. For everything you did for this family. Robert told me the whole story. Sarah looked around at the happy scene. Mr. Thompson healthy and laughing. Robert relaxed and present. Emma adding joy to every moment. I didn't do much, she said. Just helped a little until the real help came. Sometimes that's all it takes, Lisa said. Just a little help at the right moment. After lunch, Emma convinced everyone to blow bubbles again. Even Robert joined in, his suit jacket draped over a lawn chair as he chased his daughter through the rainbow-tinted spheres. Sarah's mom had to return to work, but not before hugging Mr. Thompson and arranging dinner plans for the weekend. These family meals had become a regular thing, crossing the boundaries between houses and binding them all together. Remember when you wouldn't let anyone help you? Robert asked his father as they watched Emma play. Remember when you wouldn't visit at all? Mr. Thompson countered. They looked at each other, years of hurt dissolving in the summer sunshine. We were both pretty stubborn, Robert admitted. Still are, Mr. Thompson said. But we're learning. The afternoon passed in a lazy haze of bubbles and stories and laughter. The home health aide came and went, pronouncing the house in perfect order. MS. Johnson returned for the evening checkup, and Emma counted through Mr. Thompson's exercises with exaggerated precision. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. Sarah sat on the porch steps, watching the family dynamics unfold. She'd started something here, those months ago when she found Mr. Thompson fallen and alone. But they'd taken it so much further, building something stronger and more beautiful than she could have imagined. Ice cream, Lisa called from the kitchen. Who wants some? As everyone headed inside, Robert hung back with Sarah. You know, he said quietly, we would have missed all this. If not for you. Sarah shrugged. You would have figured it out eventually. Maybe. Maybe not. He looked at his father, now sharing ice cream with Emma, their matching eyes crinkled with happiness. Sometimes it takes someone brave enough to take the first step, to show the way. I was just trying to help. You did more than help. You showed us how to be family again. He squeezed her shoulder. And now you're part of that family, too. Inside, Emma was giving Mr. Thompson an ice cream mustache, making Lisa laugh and MS. Johnson pretended to scold them about messing up her vital signs chart. Come on, Robert said. Before Emma eats all the chocolate sauce. Sarah followed him inside, into the warmth of the kitchen, into the heart of this healing family that had somehow become partly hers too. Through the window, she could see the porch where it had all started. The rocking chair still sat there, but it wasn't a lonely sentinel anymore. It was just part of a home, a real home, filled with love and laughter and the kind of healing that comes not from medicines alone, but from hearts opening to let others in. The crisp autumn air carried the sound of leaves crunching under feet as Sarah walked home from school. Her backpack was heavy with books. Advanced class meant advanced homework, but her steps were light. The afternoon sun painted Cedar Street in golden hues, glinting off the windows of Mr. Thompson's house. A moving truck sat in his driveway. Sarah's heart skipped a beat until she saw Robert directing movers carrying furniture in, not out. Mr. Thompson sat in his rocker, supervising with Emma on his lap. Sarah, Emma waved frantically. Look, we're moving in. Sarah ran up the walkway. Moving in? Robert set down the box he was carrying. We found a buyer for our house in the city. Dad needs his family close by, and Emma needs her grandpa. You're really staying? Sarah couldn't keep the excitement from her voice. All of us, Lisa confirmed, emerging from the house. We're adding a master bedroom and converting the garage into a home office for Robert. The renovations start next week. Mr. Thompson bounced Emma on his knee. Guess you'll have to put up with noisy neighbors now. Sarah looked at the construction plans spread across a folding table. The house would grow, but the porch, their porch, would stay the same. Sarah, her mom called, crossing the lawn. I have news. She carried an official-looking envelope, her hands shaking slightly as she handed it to Robert. Is this? Robert started. Open it, Sarah's mom urged. Robert tore open the envelope and pulled out a letter. His eyes scanned the page, widening. It's approved, he announced. The college fund is set up. He turned to Sarah. Your future education is taken care of. Sarah stared at him. What? A trust fund, her mom explained, tears in her eyes. Robert set it up months ago. Any college you want, it's covered. But, Sarah looked between them. Why? Because, Mr. Thompson said softly, you taught us the value of education. Not just books and grades, but learning how to care for each other. How to be family. And family takes care of family, Robert added. No arguments. Sarah's vision blurred with tears. Emma hopped off her grandfather's lap and hugged her. Now you could be a doctor, Emma declared. Or a nurse like MS. Johnson. Or a teacher like MS. Parker. Or anything she wants to be, Lisa said, putting an arm around Sarah's shoulders. The movers continued their work around them, carrying in furniture and boxes. Sarah watched them fill the house with pieces of Robert and Lisa's life, blending them with Mr. Thompson's familiar things. Oh! Emma suddenly exclaimed. Show her the other surprise. Robert grinned. Go ahead, Dad. Mr. Thompson stood smoothly now, his balance sure and strong. He walked into the house and returned with a framed document. My medical alert bracelet was getting worn, he said, holding out the frame. So I got something better. Sarah read the certificate, understanding dawning slowly. It was a living will, naming Robert as primary caregiver and medical decision-maker. But there at the bottom, listed as family emergency contacts, were Sarah and her mom's names. See? Emma pointed proudly. Official family. Sarah traced their names on the glass. But we're not really Dash. Family isn't just blood, Mr. Thompson interrupted. It's love. It's care. It's a little girl who saw someone hurting and decided to help. It's neighbors who become more, Robert added. It's shared meals and homework help and bubble-blowing sessions, Lisa said. It's us, Emma concluded firmly. Sarah's mom wiped her eyes. It's everyone in this yard right now. The moving truck pulled away, leaving boxes stacked in the driveway. Robert started organizing them by room, while Lisa directed the placement of furniture inside. Emma helped by labeling everything with colorful stickers. Mr. Thompson sat back in his rocker, patting the small table beside him where his pill organizer sat, still the same one Sarah had given him all those months ago. Remember that first day? He asked as Sarah perched on the porch rail. When you found me here? You were so stubborn, Sarah recalled. Wouldn't let anyone help. Look at me now, living with my son, spoiling my granddaughter, taking my medicine like a good patient. He chuckled. All because you were more stubborn than I was. MS. Johnson's way better at the medical stuff than I was. She is, he agreed. But you were better at the hard stuff, at showing us what we were missing. Inside, they could hear Emma singing as she placed her stickers, Lisa laughing at something Robert said. The sounds of a house becoming even more of a home. Sarah, Emma called. Come see my new room. It's next to yours. Yours? Sarah looked at her mom questioningly. Her mom smiled. They insisted on adding a study room for you. For when you're helping Emma with homework or just want a quiet place to read. A room, for me? For family, Robert said simply. Sarah looked at the house, their house now, in so many ways. At Mr. Thompson, healthy and happy in his rocker. At Emma's excited face in the window. At her mom, finally allowing others to help carry their burdens. Well, Emma was getting impatient. Come see. Sarah hugged Mr. Thompson quickly, then ran inside to where Emma waited. The little girl grabbed her hand, pulling her upstairs to a sunny room with 2 desks and tall bookshelves. One desk for you, one for me, Emma explained. For when I'm in advanced classes, too. Sarah looked out the window. From here, she could see her own house, the porch where she'd walked that hot afternoon months ago, moving slowly under the weight of responsibility. She'd been so young then, trying to carry adult burdens. Now those burdens were shared, distributed among capable shoulders. Professional care, family support, love given and received freely. "Sarah," Robert called from downstairs. "Pizza's here." She followed Emma down to where everyone gathered in the kitchen. Mr. Thompson took his evening pills without prompting. Lisa set out plates while Robert distributed slices. Her mom relaxed in a chair, looking years younger. To family, Mr. Thompson raised his water glass. "Old and new, by blood and by choice." "To love," Robert added. "To stubbornness," Sarah's mom winked at her. "To everything being okay," Sarah said softly, remembering all the times she'd worried it wouldn't be. "To everything being perfect," Emma declared. They laughed, but Sarah thought maybe Emma was right. Not perfect in the flawless way, but perfect in the real way. Perfect in the way of family loving each other, helping each other, growing together. Perfect in the way of healing,